Welcome back. We're going to knock the 2 Timothy passage out like right from the start because Timothy's letters are just a challenge for me, as you might have caught on by now. Feel free to go back and watch some of the other Timothy videos if you want a little more context than that. So the opening of the 3rd chapter of 2 Timothy feels very neutral, safe, innocent. It's a listing of characteristics and traits that I think most of us would agree are less than desirable, are not the way that humans should treat other humans, that don't fall in line with the heart, soul, mind posture that God has for us, that is innately created within us. Essentially, it describes what I would call the devil in disguise, those who outwardly purport to be followers of Jesus and then towards those they consider others, and behind closed doors, they are a different person. Now, if you happen to live where I live, this is a pretty common action. If this was a different sermon series, especially given our current political climate and situation, I could do a whole lot with that passage. Thankfully, that is not what this is. Instead, we're going to focus just on 2 words in all those 7 verses. Did you catch them? Silly women. Silly women. The writer of this letter, who, remember, most people don't agree is Paul, includes in this a warning that these people, these devils in disguise with corrupt minds and counterfeit faith, will slither, I love that word, into households and captivate the silly, easily swayed women. First, silly, it's just insulting. We're not spending time on that. It's just insulting. Second, personally, the implication then, personally meaning my interpretation, the implication then is that it is the men who are the ones living the double lives filled with corruption. Because who else is slithering into the house? So I'll just leave that there for you to hold on to. Finally, the part that is the most offensive is the insinuation that these women in the households do not have a mind or a faith of their own. Now, this might be true for some people. I don't deny that. It is particularly true in certain branches of Christianity, but it isn't true of women in general, which is how that line has been used within patriarchy. It was not how it was intended in the letter, but it's how patriarchal, extreme, right, conservative, complementarian Christianity embraces that line. Here's the irony. Those in religious patriarchy seem to not see somehow. Those are the men, those same men in those branches of Christianity. Those are the ones who create the women who are not allowed to think for themselves, act for themselves, hold their own faith, challenge the men, question the men, and on and on and on. So to be clear, that's patriarchy. That is what religious patriarchy has done. That is not what God ever intended. And that's the message that we need to circulate. That's why we're doing this whole series. To begin to educate and remind and empower that treatment of women, especially our daughters, not at all what God intended. If you want to join me in circulating that message, if you believe in that message, I'm going to ask you to right now click that like button, maybe the share button, absolutely the subscribe button, and let's try and get this moving. Let's get the truth into the hearts and the minds of women still trapped in those systems, because there are many of them. Naomi and Ruth, far from silly women. In fact, if you take the time to read the entire book of Ruth, you see just how cunning Naomi can be. And Ruth caught on real fast. These women highlight just how independent in word and thought and action women can be. But we're not doing the whole book of Ruth, right? Because as I've said in the past, I stick only to the texts listed in the book, in the commentary within the book, and that's it. So this morning we focus just on what we learn in chapter 1 of the book of Ruth through a specific lens. Again, that lens is this: God's view of women versus religion's view of women. Naomi has grief hitting her on every side. She's in a foreign country due to a famine. Her husband dies while they're there, so she's grieving him and relying on her 2 sons, still in the foreign country, for her continued food, shelter, safety, etc. Life continues. Her 2 sons marry. She finds a bit of joy, some more love. Her family is growing. These are women from this other country. Enough time has passed that she's settled into life without her husband. Still grieves him, but has settled in. Embraces life with her daughters-in-law as they love her sons. They build a family. Maybe not the one she'd envisioned, but a family nonetheless. Even the foreign country finally no longer feels foreign because of this family. And then her sons die. A decade-plus widow, now a childless mother, Naomi looks to her daughters-in-law and recognizes that they have more opportunity to remarry and find security, maybe even have children, which they had not yet, if they do not stay with her, if they go back to the homes of their mothers. This is a big sacrifice because these daughters-in-law are the only remaining connections she has to her sons. Word, in the meantime, reaches Naomi that the famine is over in Bethlehem, and so she takes that as a sign from God to return to her homeland. Amidst releasing her daughters, offering to release her daughters-in-law, we see more depth in Naomi's faith in the blessings and prayers she offers over Orpah and Ruth. Naomi lives her faith and shares it with her Moabite daughters-in-law through her grief, alongside of her grief. Orpah chooses to accept Naomi's offer and does return to her family, and there's no fault in that. There is no indication of fault in Scripture. It's just the choice that she made. There's kind of an implication of judgment of Orpah simply because of how highly Ruth is heralded, but I think that's just human projection. That's not really anywhere in the text. Naomi and Ruth then make their way back to Bethlehem and arrive there at the time of the harvest. And Naomi is greeted by these people who haven't seen her in forever, but recognize her, and they start to rejoice that she is back home. And Naomi asks them to stop rejoicing. She shares her lament and does not shy away from her feelings towards God or within herself when she says, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Naomi left her home with a husband and 2 sons and returns only with 1 daughter-in-law. She fled to Moab due to physical emptiness, but emotional, spiritual fullness, and returns home with physical fullness and spiritual, emotional, mental emptiness. Sticking to today's texts only, here's what we know of Ruth, just in this little bit of chapter 1. In the years living with her husband and mother-in-law, Ruth observed and ingested the faith of the family, which is big, right? When the offer of release is given, Ruth responds with her own expression of faith in the God of her mother-in-law. She makes a vow to stay with Naomi and to take Naomi's God as her God. She makes the vow to stay with Naomi's people even when Naomi should die. Ruth and Naomi have traded places at this point. Ruth is now the one grieving the loss of her homeland, the death of her husband, the death of her brother-in-law, and the loss of the presence of her sister-in-law. Naomi is the only constant she has, and Ruth clings to Naomi's faith as strongly as she clings to Naomi upon the offer of release. Religion doesn't talk much about either of these women. The whole book is named after Ruth, the second of only 2 books in the entire Bible named after a woman. In this book, we are given a glimpse into this transition season of Ruth's life, and at the end, we see that she becomes David's great-grandmother. Yes, that David. Think about the extension, because whose line is David in? Yeah. Outside of her book, Ruth then appears in the genealogy of Jesus. Ruth, the foreign, non-Jewish born woman in the line of Jesus. God did not care that Ruth was from Moab. God worked through Ruth because she was a child of God even before she knew that God. So what about religion? Somehow religion gets all kinds of twisted up, supporting this idea that people should not marry outside of their religion, their culture, etc. Siblings, that is religion. That is not God. And the proof of that is right here in Ruth. Naomi didn't have a picture-perfect relationship with God, according to religion. According to God, her relationship was great because she was angry with God and she felt betrayed by God because of all that she endured. But you know what? God did not begrudge her that in the least. Religion does, begrudges it to Ruth and to people today. Just ask any present-day griever who is also a believer. It's why I wrote, Faith Doesn't Erase Grief. God makes room for grief and walks alongside us as we do the work of grief. Certain branches of Christian religion say to push Jesus on everyone that you meet until you're blue in the face. But God and Jesus? No. Live your faith. Answer questions when asked and let the Spirit do the work. Naomi and her sons did not force their faith upon Ruth and Orpah. They lived it. They continued their practices in the foreign land, and Ruth ingested them. Orpah may have too. I don't know, but she may have. Many branches of Christianity in 2024 still limit the who of spreading the word. Women, by some branches of Christianity, are still viewed as being at too much risk of being silly and easily swayed and misled in their faith. But Jesus, if you allow your eyes and your heart to read the Gospels unburdened by religion, you will find that Jesus in no way limits the role of women instructing in the faith. Naomi and Ruth are examples of what it is to live a human, real life faith, what it is to wrestle with God through the pain of grief and loss and change. Religion limits the story of Ruth to her role in the line of David, and sometimes to her faithfulness to Naomi. God, though, gave us more than that. Naomi is more than the woman who wanted to change her name to reflect what God had done to her, and Ruth is more than a woman who got King David's line going. Religion reduces them, not God. So let's change that storyline, because these women will teach us a lot if we allow them to. Naomi was called, Ruth was called the Moabite woman. You are called. I am called. Siblings, we all are called, and we need to be speaking. Thank you for being here. Thank you for continuing on this ride, and I hope that you will stick with it. I hope that you will start interacting a little bit more, sharing, commenting, subscribing. Let's keep it going. See you next week.